Hey everyone, this is Robbie Bennett, back with the second episode of the Fair podcast. Sorry, it's been a little while. Um, get into that a little bit later this episode. But with me today is Fahim. If you want to say hey real quick.
Yeah, everyone, it's me.
um, yeah, so today we're not going to go. It's going to be a little bit different structure, even though it's only the second episode. The first part of this is going to be us talking about dimensionality reduction and a couple of models associated with that. And instead of taking questions this week, because we got some about natural language processing, we were talking about this right before recording this, and we decided that it would be better to answer those questions and talk about that when we have some kind of NLP, large language model paper that we could then kind of dovetail into and talk about that. So we're going to wait for a future episode to talk through some of those topics. But today we're going to talk about dimensionality reduction and then talk about the conference that I just got back from not too long ago. That was the reason why this episode is so late. Um, but yeah, it's going to be a little bit shorter today, potentially. We'll see what we can do, what kind of content we can squeeze out of this. But to start off, I'll let Fahim break into dimensionality reduction and what that actually does and what it means and kind of what we use it for in research or whatever.
Sure. So, to kind of help everyone understand this concept, I want you to first kind of imagine it trying to navigate through a map which has millions of coordinates on top of it. Already, that sounds like it's really overwhelming. And that's what it's kind of like for many machine learning models as well, when they deal with what we call high dimensional data. So, we're talking about dimensionality reduction today, and one of its more powerful tools, known as principal component analysis, or as I'll keep saying, PCA. So in machine learning, we often work with these really large data sets that have dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of features, also known as quote unquote dimensions. And while some features can have more information than others, they can also lead to a problem that's known as the curse of dimensionality. So this really refers to the way that data becomes quite sparse and less meaningful as the number of dimensions really increases. So this makes models much harder to train, makes them prone to overfitting, and sometimes just makes them take longer to run. So what's the solution to this kind of problem, the curse of dimensionality? What we try to do is we try to reduce the number of dimensions while keeping as much important information as possible, which we call dimensionality reduction. So more formally, dimensionality reduction techniques serve to really project this high dimensional data onto a lower dimensional space while still preserving the structure, the variance, and the relationships that are most relevant to the kind of task you're using the machine learning model to perform. And this really helps models generalize better. And also at the same time, really speeds up training. It makes visualization actually more possible. Because imagine, for example, plotting like a 1000 dimensional graph. Doesn't make any sense. But 2D or 3D is much more doable. You're trying to get to that goal where you can really isolate these smaller, lower planes. So think of it like compressing is a very large, detailed map that you're making into a simpler version to show you key roads, landmarks, and directions, basically everything you really need to get to where you need to go without being overwhelmed. So there are two kind of main types of dimensionality reduction techniques. One is feature selection. So when we choose a subset of the original features, and the other is feature extraction, which is when we basically create new features by combining the existing ones. And PCA, principal component analysis, falls to that second category. It's more or less a kind of statistical technique that transforms our original features into a new set, which we call principal components. So this sounds like a lot of tech jargon. I'm going to make it simple for you by giving you this kind of mental example. So imagine you're trying to go navigate through a busy city like Dallas, Texas, where I'm at right now, and you have access to thousands of different kinds of traffic data to plan your route. You can have like congestion, weather updates, noise levels, traffic at every street, air quality. The point is, we have a lot of data and it's all technically relevant, but how much of that do you really need to make this effective decision about your route? So, dimensionality reduction, imagine you're using a smart GPS that kind of analyzes all of its data and keeps us really actually meaningful or helpful for your current trip. So, for example, it may look at traffic speed and construction and maybe also accidents down the way too. These are going to be the biggest factors that tell you how long it will take to get from point A to point B. And at the same time, it's going to, ignore things that are less meaningful, like air quality or data from a different city, because you're not there. It's not really helping this task. It maybe has a long distance kind of effect, but it's not really the effect that you're looking for. This is essentially what dimensionality reduction does. It looks at all this available data, and it tries to piece together what contributes the most to the problem we're looking at, and then filters out the rest. Now, let's say that the GPS doesn't just pick the best data that we have, but it actually creates new composite data from the data we're giving to it. Maybe it combines, let's say, any traffic speed, construction, accident reports, you name it, and makes this whole new metric called, I don't know, traffic flow efficiency. And maybe another one is combining things like weather and public transit delays, and it calls this like urban mobility. The point I'm trying to get to is that these new combined metrics are what we call the principal components. They're made from your original data, but they represent a more simplified, powerful way to really guide your decision making in your model. That's kind of a general idea. What it really does is going to give you a way to make your system go faster, not overload of all the useless kind of noise, and also help you make decisions based on the most informative patterns. So just like this, you need the right kind of combination of this data to get you the most powerful kind of predictive value from your data set once you've cleaned it up using this process. And that's more or less the way that principal component analysis and dimensionality reduction work. So yeah, I wanted to go into the math a bit, but I think Robbie is much stronger with that. So if you want, you can talk about that too. But I have some
No,
I can talk about as
I'm
well.
not going to ruin anyone's listening experience with a bunch of linear algebra and stats.
Yeah,
uh, but yeah, one of the things that really stuck out to me is the different means of doing dimensionality reduction, and I think that's the big thing.
yeah,
Because, like you said, you can't plot like 4 or 5 dimensional plots. I mean,
yeah,
technically, you could probably plot fourth dimension and have it like in a time series, like in
yeah,
a GIF or a video or something.
yeah,
But I mean, there's a data set that I'm working with right now that has, I think, over 100,000 features in it.
yeah,
I can't plot that. I can't even begin to plot that. I don't know. I could start doing correlation analysis to see which ones are
yeah,
correlated with what. But if I just wanted to get the most variance from my data that I could
yeah.
use to train a model and reduce it down to a handful of features. Principal component analysis is going to do that. Another easy way of doing that is a method not as many people use, but linear discriminant analysis.
Mhm.
Um, it's where it's the same thing as principal component analysis. With if anyone, uh, if everyone knows these terms, it's uh, unsupervised. So that means we don't have classifications for the data. We don't know if it's a cat or a dog or whatever. It's just arbitrary data, kind of
You got
like,
to figure this out basically what to classify as.
yeah. But with linear discriminant analysis, we have those classes, and it maximizes the variance between classes. So
Mhm.
it maintains that variance and does the dimensionality reduction while also trying to separate the classes as much as possible.
Yeah,
So you can do better. It can help improve classification, or not classification, but maybe some kind of decision making or regression or something like that. It can help reduce a lot of that while keeping the dimensionality. Because yeah, training a model on that many uh, features is absolutely horrendous. I'm
yes,
doing it right now. It's not fun. I'm trying to do all this hyperparameter tuning to make sure my neural network isn't overfitting to the data, but
yeah,
I'm having to dumb down the model so much that I don't even know if it's possible. And then kind of like to what you
yeah,
were saying, to some of that dimensionality reduction is what we call with methylation data, because it'll have 100,000 features because we're talking about every single uh, piece of methylation on DNA. For those that don't know, uh, it's part of epigenetics, which I think stands for like genetics on top or something like that. I forget exactly what the words derive from, but it's modifications to DNA. It's not
Yeah.
changing the DNA itself. It's just attaching to the DNA, and it affects the transcription of the
Yeah.
DNA.
So, oh, sorry. Sorry to cut you off. Sorry.
So the what we do is we kind of cluster those into differentially uh, methylated regions or something like that. And
Mhm.
so that way we can reduce a ton of sites to just a handful of blocks, or it might still be a ton of blocks, but it's not 80,000.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned, like, I was just thinking about what you said before, especially with plotting all those different data points. Like, I have not that many dimensions in one of my data sets. We're dealing with blood gas data we collected in a longitudinal experiment over, like, I want to say 10 different points. So when you do these blood gas kind of tests, if you have like one of those machines, it gives you like 50 outputs. And when we did three different tests, that's 150 times 10 times, 10 times we did that. So 150,000 basically. And I'm like, I'm sorry, 15,000. And I'm like, that's a lot of data. And I've tried basically plotting out like, oh, I'll make a 3D model of just these 3 points on top of each other and see if I can just visualize clustering in that data. Did not work at all. It looked really horrendous. And as I sat there trying to get some number sense of my data, I was like, I need to cut out stuff that just doesn't make sense. And the example I gave when I was talking about the traffic, that's an easy one because like air quality, it's not as important as like pedestrian kind of traffic. Similarly, of like blood gas data, for example, does time of day really have as much of an impact as like urea content or bicarbonate in blood? Like these are fundamentally different kind of predictors. So I think another key thing is that also understanding your data very well because the algorithm can do as much as it can, but also kind of like having that number sense and realizing what you're looking at, that will save you a lot of time. And using these things in tandem with each other, it will cut down the dimensions, cut down basically the garbage that exists in your data. And then you can start to go and play around with these methods a bit more. And then hopefully you don't have to try to plot like 150 different things and axes on your graph and not know what's going on.
Yeah, a lot of this dimensionality reduction gets really close to one of my favorite parts about AI, and
Mhm.
it's the transforming or manipulating of data in very intentional ways
Yeah.
to get at better results or get at to some new predictor entirely. Like
Yeah.
the work that I'm doing trying to generate a resilience metric using clinical data, longitudinal clinical data. So we have multiple time points for these samples. We're trying
Mhm.
to generate a metric based on those that's separate from all the data that we have. So we
Right.
can then go on to do additional research that wasn't possible without it. So
Yeah.
that's the part that's really cool to me is a lot of the dimensionality reduction stuff in AI classes and in YouTube videos and stuff just kind of glazes over it because it's old. It's been around for a long time. There's still new methods coming out, like SVMs are newer and can do it.
Mhm.
You can do a lot of things for, to do dimensionality reduction, but it creates, it has the potential of creating new variables that are more informative than anything that you already have.
And that's interesting also if you think about just philosophically, like a lot of calculated parameters, like we get these measured parameters in our data all the time, but there are also a bunch of calculated parameters that sometimes if you actually think about the nature of that calculated parameter, like how did someone even think about this? Um, but at the same time, sometimes these calculated parameters may be the most important thing, more than the actual like measured parameters are themselves. Or even better, if they have a physical analog, then that's actually really pushing the research even further. In my kind of project, what I did is kind of funny. Like I basically threw every single known way of processing our data, like the kind of data that we get, into like an algorithm to just like spit out every single data point possible. And then I would run it through like a feature importance thing, which basically works like dimensional reduction, but a different way. And I was just like, huh, some of these features actually, they seem to have like similar levels of importance, but they're not related to each other. So if I combine them together and voila, you get something cool. And I'm like, if I can find a physical analog for that, something you can get clinically, that improves the kind of research field in general because now you have a way to really improve translatability. So we're not just living in the hypothetical world of ML models, but rather how the clinical setting works.
Yeah, it's dimensionality reduction doesn't get as much hype as it should. And I'm a hypocrite when I say that because all of my research right now is completely almost entirely skirting using dimensionality reduction because I do a lot of molecular work where I want to find very subtle correlations between specific CPG sites or specific transcripts or stuff like that. And so I'm willing to just beat my head against the wall of hyperparameter tuning and just do everything I can because I'm specifically looking for biomarkers on a molecular level. And some of those, because it's biology, it's going to be um, really minute changes in things. But once you start getting into trying to do classification, you're not doing regression. You don't have to worry about getting the exact value for this sample, and you're just looking to classify whether they have cancer or not.
Yeah,
PCA, LDA, any of that is going to reduce it and make not only reduce your variables, but make everything run faster,
yeah,
potentially make it more accurate, because you're not having to filter out all of the other features. Because there's a lot of machine learning models that'll do feature importance built in, but if it's having to do a bunch of extra work to do that, it might not be helpful. It might just be hindering
yeah,
the process and making it less likely to be translational to clinical settings or whatever.
yeah, for sure, for sure. It's very important actually as well. Like sometimes, and this goes back to the point I think I was trying to tease that before. I'm not sure how clearly it came out. Understand your data. I think that will just like solve a lot of these problems as well. It's funny because my PI was talking to me a couple of days ago and just asking me some questions about the data I was using. I'm like, huh, I never really thought about this until now because I'm looking at it from like, well, I'm going to code everything and like let the computer magically find it for me. But once I use number sense, I'm like, wait, no, duh, that's what it's telling me. Why did I think about it before? And I think that will inform your decisions a lot as well.
Yeah, and even in my work with the methylation data, I
Mm-hmm.
want to find these really subtle differences between these specific modifications, but at the same time, in the field,
Mm-hmm.
differentially methylated regions, so those blocks that contain a lot of methylation,
Mm-hmm.
are considered to have more power to them than any like small collection of modifications and stuff. So they're more trusted than just any random collection of methylation. So even just like doing some kind of dimensionality reduction, like clustering them into blocks,
Yeah.
is more trusted in the omics community among people. So like it's wholly dependent on what you're trying to do and um, what you're testing. So it's really interesting, especially once you start. If anyone is actually good at math and interested in it, please 100% take like a linear algebra class or something like that and go through because in learning how to do PCA, you learn how to calculate math in multi dimensions. And not only that, but go from one dimension to another or one collection of dimensions to another collection of dimensions. It opens up this world of like, it's you're doing math and you feel like you're traveling to other dimensions because you're just transforming these variables back and forth. It's
Right,
so
right.
cool and it's so neat. Even though it is math, that's probably one of the nerdiest things I've ever said.
I'm gonna quote you on that and just share that every time you talk. I'll make a ring.
Doing math is cool and neat, guys. I swear, believe me.
Telling all the med students that, right?
Yeah, I don't think
Awesome.
anyone is super excited about math, but it is. There's some really cool things.
Yeah. I think,
And
oh, sorry.
no, go for it. I was after your thought. We'll get on to the next section so we don't take up
Yeah.
everyone's time.
Yeah. Yeah. But my thought was just a side thought. But like, once I really delved into the mathematics about the models I was using, like I work mostly with like random forest, decision tree, CNN. These are my three like bread and butter. Once I really delved into the mathematics, it made my decision making with like models, like my hyperparameter tuning, structure of the model. It made it so much more sensible. And I was like, when I first started doing like my data sets, like I had like 50% accuracy. I jumped to 80% basically after sitting there for like a really long weekend, which I don't want to remember that weekend, but I did, and just like writing stuff out by hand. I'm like, I wonder if I tried this. And if someone asked me to reproduce it, I probably cannot because I seriously had quite a bit of coffee that weekend. And I don't know what I was thinking, but it worked. But yeah, once you sit and do the mathematics behind any of these models, you actually kind of find it to be quite interesting. I won't go as far as Robbie is saying, like it's fun and everything, because I like my life. It's like yeah, it is really going to improve your decision making in general and teach you how to work with this more effectively. Essentially, it's for your own good.
Yeah, and if you don't want to do the math, just ask ChatGPT why it's fun and cool, and it'll give you some reason, and you can just tell people that.
Oh yeah, that's I forgot about you. As we'll talk about next week, right? With all the questions we got about it.
uh, yeah. So the last part of this podcast, like I mentioned earlier, is going to be about the conference that I went to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because I wanted to talk on some of the cool things that I'm seeing in actual research that were presented by researchers, by scientists, um, so people can get an idea of what's actually happening with AI in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And the conference that I went to was the American Aging Association conference called AGE. It was in Anchorage, Alaska. It was beautiful. The sun, it didn't get dark until like midnight, which really threw me off. Their spring is starting, so they're starting to get those really long days. And then the sun rose at like 5 o'clock in the morning. They barely got any. I'm assuming in the middle of the summer, it's just going to be light for like 3 days straight. But
Wow.
either way, beautiful mountains, really gorgeous area. Highly recommend. Um, and I didn't have a single bad cup of coffee there. I don't know how, but even the catering coffee was great. So highly recommend.
That's
Um,
never good.
right? I
Yeah.
was it was incredible.
Wow. Now I
But
want to go to Alaska of all places.
it's I didn't realize this sidetrack entirely. I didn't realize how huge Alaska is. It's like 2.5 times larger than Texas.
Really?
Yeah, Alaska is massive.
Okay, now you're really selling this place to me. Okay, sorry, but continue your thoughts.
But yeah, a lot of the machine learning that was happening there, most of it was more basic implementation of like random forest or using PCA, something like that. But there was a few that were really neat. There was a couple of talks about primates.
Mhm.
Um, One of them was by Noah Snyder Mackler, and his talk was environmental modifiers of molecular aging within and across individuals. And it's really neat because there's a an island of rhesus macaques that they're monitoring. So these aren't entirely wild, but they're not entirely tame either. They're just allowed to run around on the island. They get some medical treatment. They get fed regularly. So it's
Mhm.
this nice middle ground between wild and in captivity.
Sure.
And I forget what hurricane came through, but some years ago, a really bad hurricane came through. It's the one that devastated Puerto Rico. Um, and this island is right off the coast of Puerto Rico.
Sure.
It got destroyed too.
Mm.
Uh, but the work that they're trying to do is see if these events if these big events like hurricanes, these big natural disasters or something, increase the rate of aging in these primates. So if you have
Mm.
this big stressful event, what does that do on a molecular level to potentially increase a rate of aging in these animals? And
Sure.
so they're looking at that, and it seems like it doesn't, even though you go through this big stressful event, and the rate of death hasn't increased afterwards, from my understanding, even though like they lost a lot of the trees and stuff on the island. They've been really resilient, and so they're trying to understand that resilience with machine learning now. But the talk was about how these animal, or whether or not it was the case that a major stressful event leads to that aging.
Yeah.
And it was really cool. It was really interesting work. It was an idea that I never thought about and didn't know how to even begin to quantify. But
I was
since
about
he'd
to
been,
ask that. Like, how are you going to quantify any of that?
well, you can, so it's really similar to the work that I did
Uh,
and that I presented. And my PI actually texted this researcher. and told him to come to my paper and talk to me. Uh,
Mm.
so I actually got a one-on-one talk with Noah. But yeah, they have a lot of the same kind of lab values that we're using in my research,
Mm.
and I've been able to calculate a resilience metric that's correlated with age at death.
Okay.
So it's doable, but they were originally just using like epigenetic clocks and things like that, which in the aging field, epigenetic clocks is how you calculate someone's age. It's been the most effective way of calculating someone's uh calculating the chronological age through biologic
Mm.
data.
Gotcha.
Um because epigenetic modifications can change throughout your life.
Yeah.
So it's a good representation of molecular cellular age. So they're trying to do that. And that was really interesting. There was another talk about calculating biological age, but I just couldn't keep up with it. It was really cool stuff, and I to really wrap my mind around it, I needed to sit down with him. Um, I'm hoping to send an email and have that conversation soon. Maybe even have him on the podcast if he's down.
That'd be
Um,
interesting. Out of curiosity, were they focused more on like gathering a large amount of biological data and applying it to ML model, or is it the other way around? Like they got basic bio data and used crazy models on it.
so I think the thing that's interesting about this is that you don't need any kind of wild model to do this.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Um, and at least through the research that I've done. Um, but yeah, I think they've just been collecting data on these animals for years and years and now have it. And they're like, all right, what can we do with this?
Sure.
And so now they're starting to ask questions, especially after the hurricane. They're like, all right, now that we have some years of data after the hurricane, what has changed? And so that's
Yeah.
kind of some of what they're trying to get at
Yeah.
in that project. There was another really cool. Uh, I know there's a lot of image analysis, image AI people at Wake Forest.
Hmm.
There was this really neat. There was a couple of neat posters that I saw. One of them was, I think they were using um, uh, I forget if it was images. Oh, it was short videos. That's what it was. I don't have access to the posters anymore. Um, but they were using these short videos of patients with and without dementia to try to
Mm.
determine if they have dementia or have some kind of cognitive decline. Um,
Was it tracking their motion or tracking like facial expressions or responsa?
it was
Just thinking.
tracking their motion. So they were videos of
Wow.
these people walking around.
Got you. So it's like very
And
kinematics kind of approach.
yeah, and uh I think there was another one where they were doing something similar to mice.
Okay.
But either way, there's people that are just trying to find ways of using kind of already in place technology to do kind of automatic testing of people. So
Yeah.
instead of having to uh, constantly
Creative.
do these kind of like um, cognitive testing, that's the word I'm thinking of,
Yeah.
you could have just the security cameras
Yeah.
do that for you.
Ah.
So the thing that I think was kind of that I wish I would have seen in that poster was them doing this continuously, but they were just doing classifications on short videos. And I think
Got you.
it would have been more interesting if they would have had a use case where they were using something. My favorite model to always reference is YOLO for any kind of video processing. Use that to create some kind of metric that represents if the person is experiencing some kind of cognitive decline or dementia or whatever.
Yellow, you mean you only look once, right? That one?
Yeah,
Got you. Yeah. I played around with that one time and I was really unhappy with it. Maybe I have to bother you about that later on.
I've tried to implement it before. It can be rough, especially given how much data it needs.
Yeah, I was about to say that. That's probably why they could only do what they did. Because for this kind of task, you probably need exponentially large amounts of data. And they probably were working with just volunteers, right?
I forget. I think there was some. They were using some data set online of elderly
Ah,
patients walking around, if I'm not mistaken. But
okay, interesting.
either way, I think it's easier with video because you have so many frames in a second.
Sure, true.
It's just labeling all those frames.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. That would be hell on earth.
Yeah, it's a lot. And then you also have to have a really good gold standard for that,
Yeah,
where like, and I think this is probably why they went with the data set because it's it's easy to classify something. It's hard to segment something.
yeah,
For people that don't know, classification is where you just take something, like you take a picture of an animal and you say what kind of animal it is.
yeah,
Segmenting is where you take a picture of a bunch of animals and you tell it to find where the cat is, and then it like draws a box or some kind of blob over that to show you where it is.
yeah,
So the segmenting, you need to do very strict gold standard kind of labeling of where that is so the models can accurately and reliably pick it out.
yeah. You're bringing back bad memories. I worked heavily with the segmentation of ultrasound images. Maybe we'll talk about that a different time. One of these. I used. Have you heard of faster RCNN?
No. Oh,
Oh
wait,
yeah,
wait, wait. I think I have actually.
yeah. It's an iteration of RCNN, maybe become fast RCNN, maybe become faster RCNN for image segmentation. That's probably a discussion for a very different time because I don't want to steal your thunder of talking about your genetic stuff. But yeah, let's definitely we'll talk about that later for sure.
Yeah, image analysis is really cool, and it's going through a lot of mini revolutions right now, which is really neat to see.
Right.
Even if it's just video analysis like this and classification, or if it's the more in-depth stuff of finding and segmenting specific like tumors or something like that. Um, it's really innate, and it was interesting to see how it's being implemented uh, for aging research because it feels like a lot of the use cases in aging is for specific diseases. So
Right.
in our field we call them age related diseases or symptoms of aging.
Hmm.
So it seems like those are more the use cases where you're trying to use image analysis to find tumors or find maybe areas of arthritis or uh, trying to use it to classify brain scans into people that potentially have Alzheimer's or something.
Mhm.
But it was neat to see it in completely non-invasive, completely not like not something that you have to do, something that's kind of
Yeah.
automatic for a healthcare system that can
Right.
automatically give you that score without anyone having to do additional work. I think that's
Right.
the big thing is like I love seeing these methods that aren't just something to be implemented in a pipeline that someone has to check and sign off on, but something that's just kind of a passive score.
Yeah.
Uh, there
And
was some of
that
that. Go for it.
I was gonna say that really improves translatability a lot.
Hmm.
Uh because it gives a clinician access to really the outputs. And like this is a really far off topic, but just with the ethics of ML and AI and medicine in general, one of the biggest problems is people have no idea what's the purpose of the AI being applied in the medical field. But by doing this kind of approach, you increase the power and interaction with the outputs, which increases trust. I know it's a very ancillary point, not important to what you're talking about, but I just thought about it right now. That's like a very good side kind of benefit that comes along the way.
Yeah, and another neat thing along the same lines was there was a research project. There's some of this happening here at Wake Forest, where they were using data collected by like smartwatches
Uh,
to do. I think they were also trying to get at some neurodegenerative diseases or maybe frailty. Might have been frailty. Um, but they were just collecting like gait speed and stuff like that. Some
yeah,
really general easy to collect at this point metrics from smartwatches and continuously create or update a metric that is representative of that person and even show
Yeah,
trends throughout the day of when it might
yeah,
be worse or better. And I think that's really interesting. I think those are some of the things that are going to be the most help for doctors is just having some kind of metric from outside of the hospital that they can rely on instead of like um, self-reporting from the person
of
that
course.
might be like bending the truth because they don't want to seem like they're not listening to their doctor or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a very good point. The data doesn't lie. Patients can lie, but data doesn't lie.
Yeah, I talk about nutrition research a lot, and I have one friend that's like, "Well, that's all self-reported, so it's not reliable." And I was like, "Well, yeah, but what else are we going to do?"
Yeah, you're all good for the data you got, but I mean, the more you can remove dishonesty from data, the better for everyone. But someone has to do it first because it's kind of
Yeah.
hard to cause that trend.
Um, but all the other uses of AI that I saw were things like I saw multiple people using principal component analyses,
Okay.
and I saw good uses of it and bad uses of it. One of the good uses was that people were actually going through and plotting the different principal components because you can get back any number of principal components you want. It's
Yeah.
just the dimensions in the new what's called feature space.
Okay.
And they were plotting those against each other and then found a combination of principal components that showed a very stark difference in their two groups that they had data from.
Mm.
And so with that, they could then delve into each principal component and find out what was most contributing to the variance in those and see what the difference was between those two groups based on that.
Ah, so it's like quantifying feature importance with PCA essentially. And
Yeah,
if
it
that's
was.
creative, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that I love about uh, finding these methods and using them for new use cases like
Yeah, yeah,
dimensionality reduction, and then looking at those reduced dimensions in comparison with each other to try to find differences in your
yeah.
data. That was
Loki,
really cool.
yeah. Loki, if you can find their paper when it comes out, make sure you send it to me. I kind of might hijack that method and make my own as a result of it because I'll need it one day.
Well, I mean, I think people have been doing that for a little bit, but it's
Really?
not used a lot in research. It takes someone that
Yeah.
knows what principal component is to use it that way.
Sure, sure, sure,
Um,
sure.
And the other way that I saw was someone just did principal component analysis on their data, plotted principal component one versus principal component two,
Yeah,
which is pretty standard.
yeah,
But then they
yeah.
use that as a means of essentially trying to cluster their data. So they were
Ah,
like, if you look here, these are two different groups because we did PCA on them. And that's not how that works. There
they're
might be a
kind
difference
of
there, but
yeah, we're kind of making unsupervised learning tasks from the PCA, but also replicating K means at the same time. If that's the
yeah.
best way. That's very interesting, but yeah, that's not how it works. But very, very interesting thought process.
Yeah, I think it would be better to just do PCA and then pass the principal components to a clustering algorithm
Yeah.
and then let it do that for you. But yeah, it was uh, it was a good example, and I think this is
Yeah.
probably a good point, a good time to bring up this point. Knowing what your models do and just like a
Yes.
high level understanding, at least, of like this does dimensionality reduction, and it captures variance in the data. So
Yeah.
then you're not going and trying to implement it and giving a talk in front of people, and some of those people knows what that does better than you. And then
They're
they
like,
make a
why would you
podcast where
do
they talk
this?
about you.
If they watch this podcast and they come after us, I'm blaming you, not me. I did
That's
nothing
fine.
wrong.
I'll tell them how to use PCA right.
There you go. Okay. Silver lining behind everything.
But yeah, it's really important to know. And then a lot of the time, so I like to compare AI to stats.
Mm.
There's maybe one way that's optimal for getting the value you need or doing the calculation you need,
Uh-huh.
but there's probably a dozen or more different methods you could use to do the same thing and potentially get the
Yeah.
same value.
Yeah.
So for uh, a lot of tasks that you use AI for, you can use a bunch of different models to do that. It's
Mhm.
just justifying that one in the context.
Sure.
So I think that's the big thing, and a lot of people use dimensionality tools as a way of doing data exploration and then explain
Yeah.
things in their data with it. And I don't think that's the right way. I think if it's going to be that, it needs to be paired with something else because that's not its
Yeah.
function.
I can see why that's a natural kind of inclination for someone to use that because you're like, oh, this is a very way to understand my data of quote unquote numbers. But not, I feel like if you're using a combination of traditional statistics with dimensionality reduction, that might be the way to go, as opposed to just like hashing around trying to figure out what's going on. It can be as simple as just any basic stats test, just seeing what has significance, and then going from there. Use dimensional reduction to actually just keep the key things that have a highly predictive value, and then try to do stuff like PCA to see if you can improve that predictive value even further. You get what I'm trying to say? Like
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's off the top of my head, so maybe it's not the best approach, but like rather than just strictly relying on just dimensionality analysis to kind of just, I mean, reduction to really, come up with your feature pool.
Yeah, I think probably this is what I end up telling a lot of people. Whenever you're trying to decide on a model, just have a quick chat with ChatGPT.
Yeah, there you go. It's even better.
Like if you don't have access to someone, or maybe you're just trying to like brainstorm
Yeah,
through it one night.
yeah,
The amount of conversations that I've had with ChatGPT to be like, what models would be best to handle longitudinal methylation data?
yeah,
And then I go through it because I have some knowledge of the data that I'm working with. I can be like, well, what about this aspect of it? Or what
right.
about this? Like, how do I handle these kinds of things? And then you'll gain so much knowledge about AI and the different models by doing that because it's your project. It's
Mm-hmm,
something you want to know about that you're interested in. So you could actively do that. And then at the end of it, if you want to implement it, if you have some of the data or something, you can.
mm-hmm,
Um, but it's it's definitely, I don't know. There's a lot in the world these days, and there's a lot of labs that just kind of default to some things,
yeah.
and that's why I'm always questionable. My PI probably gets mad at me because I'm always like, "Do we have to do this, or why is it done this way? This doesn't make sense." And then she explains it
Yeah.
to me. I'm like, "All right, yeah, I'm the stupid one. I'm sorry." But yeah, it's helpful, and then even sometimes just a chat with ChatGPT if you don't have someone you can talk to immediately, um, can solve a lot of those issues.
I'll give you counseling too, as we'll talk about next week.
Yeah, yeah. You after you take your new idea to your boss or your PI or whatever and pitch it to them, and they're like, "No, this is dumb." Then you can go back
Yeah.
to ChatGPT and be like, "My PI said I was stupid. Please
Yeah.
console me."
Yeah. I need a friend.
But yeah, I think that's about all that we have for this week. We're coming up on 45 minutes, so uh, I don't want to take any more of anyone's very limited time. It seems like everyone is just like slammed busy right now.
Yeah, it's summer semester, and I mean, all the little kids are out having fun, but we're in the lab working. And if we have interns, then that's also another complication factor right there. Actually, the biggest complication factor is that,
Yeah, we don't really get time off. Oh
yeah,
well. But
freedom will come.
I hope so. I hope I graduate and it gets better.
I have a strange feeling we always say that kind of stuff, and then you're like, after graduation, I wish I was back in grad school.
Yeah, that's true. I was thinking about that the other day. Well, either way,
Yeah,
thanks for listening this
that's a
week.
good place to stop before we cry together
let's
with group counseling with ChatGPT.
yeah, let's end this on our high note of maybe things
Yeah.
won't get better.
Yeah. All right. Well, take care, everyone. It's nice to. We're not hearing from you guys. Hopefully, you enjoyed hearing from us, and then we will see you guys next time talking about large language models. Right?
Yeah, if
I think it's a
we
plan. Yeah,
have a guest speaker that's on the docket for some point, but it's waiting to see when they'll have time.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, we'll be back. I don't have a conference. I don't know if you have a conference coming up in the next 2-3 weeks.
I do.
Um, well, we either Fahim's going to be recording from a hotel or we'll postpone again.
I like hotel recordings. We'll see. We'll see. Awesome. Take care, everyone.
Yeah, have a good one. If you have any questions, send them to fair@wakehealth.edu. I believe it's the same email address. I think we're going to be migrating eventually, but
Mm,
either way, send them there. Comment on the YouTube video if you're watching it there.
yeah,
Yeah, any way you can think of to reach out. And until next time, have fun.
yeah. Cool.